All right. Welcome into the HoosierIllustrated.com Indiana basketball postgame wrap-up show. John Alden from In Touch with Indiana Sports and basketball recruiting analyst Kyler Staley with you here to recap Indiana's 69-58 win over the UNC Greensboro Spartans to improve to 4-0 before they travel to the Bahamas next week in the Battle for Atlantis. Very, very much a roller coaster of a game, Kyler. There was, at the beginning of the game, really the first couple of frames looked like Indiana was going to get off to, they got off to a great start, but it looked like it was going to be smooth sailing potentially for the entirety of the game. But as soon as that kind of the opening substitution from Mike Woodson took place, things were never really the same. UNC Greensboro was able to kind of take advantage of a stagnant Indiana offense from that point forward, and then eventually get it to the point to where in the second half it's tied 40-40. So before I go any further, I guess I'll hand it off to you and just kind of get your initial thoughts on what happened. How did they end up having this type of game?
Yeah, I got a lot of thoughts that are in my head, and I'm trying to compile all of them. But I guess first off, you're happy that you won. At the same time, how happy are you that you won at the same time? Because that was ugly. That was really, really ugly. And we'll start there. The easy thing to do in this type of game, knowing how the Indiana fan base reacts and things, the easy thing to do is to automatically say, hey, as soon as those subs happen, that's when everything got bad, blah, 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 and stuff, which is true. That's factual. We all watched that game. Same time, that's a small excuse, and that's a small moment in the game, especially that early on in the game. You got to wake up at some point. Yeah. And that's not just on Mike Woodson. How easy it would be to blame him for that. That's not just on Mike Woodson. That's on the players. Because he eventually got the starters back in. What the starters do? Nothing. They really played around with this team, a team that's half the size of them, a team that wants to slow down and control the pace of the game. And that's exactly what they did for a lot of the times. Obviously, Miles Rice started off really hot. It looked like he was going to be the guy again and stuff. But Indiana got lackadaisical, and they just got lazy. And a lot of times, giving really weak passes to the post. They should have absolutely dominated in the post this game. Absolutely should have dominated given the size of the front court, or the lack of size of the front court that UNCG had. Ballo and Renew should have feasted down low, and they just didn't. And I will say the guards didn't do a really good job of getting the ball to them. So, it got a little scary in the second half, I'd say, too, just because they cut it down to, I don't know, they tied it at one time, and then Indiana goes on the run. It was just these little mini runs that barely kept Indiana in good distance from them. Just a lot of it just reminded me a lot of last year. It really did. A lot of last year, which is sad, and I didn't want to ever think about last year again, but it reminded me of that in a little bit. And it's your typical, coming off a big win against South Carolina, a Power 4 school, SEC school, and then you have the Bahamas right after this game. It was the perfect trap game. Indiana didn't fall for the trap, completely, but they could have played a lot better tonight.
Yeah, and one thing that's interesting that you and I were kind of mentioning before we got rolling here is one thing that always comes with anytime you're playing in these MTEs where you go overseas, or at least, out of the mainland of the country, and you're playing a few games in a row, there's usually a point like what Indiana and all these other teams that are participating in the Battle for Atlantis, and I believe the same thing goes with whenever you play in the Maui Invitational. Your first few games are very much a lot more spread out compared to the rest of the main part of the season. And I'm not trying to make an excuse for Indiana, but one thing that's definitely evident is that we really haven't seen this team really find a way to stay in a rhythm from game to game, because all of the games they've played up to this point have been so far apart from each other. And next week when they go down to the Bahamas, they're going to get the exact opposite of that whenever they play back-to-back-to-back days. And again, it's going to be interesting to see how they come out for those games when they get down to the Imperial Ballroom or the Imperial Arena, whatever that thing's called, and take on Louisville on Wednesday. Because, and you heard probably Robbie Hummel and Connor Onion mention it multiple times, this Louisville team, even though they're kind of hit or miss too with the way that they play, but their style of basketball can really burn Indiana if they're playing as stagnant or in several stagnant frames the way that they did tonight against UNC Greensboro.
Absolutely. I mean, so far we've seen the season. Indiana's just not been able to put a complete game together for 40 minutes. They've had 4 games so far. I would say their most complete game was against South Carolina, but this one was just one of those ones where you really just wanted them to just take care of UNCG and just, handle business early on. It looked like they were going to do that, but a lot of it just came from effort, especially when it comes to the glass. And I beat this. It's like a dead horse. I beat it all the time that I think Indiana should be one of the best rebounding teams in the country, given their size year in and year out. And the total count was 43-38. And Indiana barely squeaked by on that. I think a lot of that had to do with it because a lot of the scoring opportunities that UNC Greensboro had today was off of second chance points. So you got to correct that because especially if you're going to go to Battle for Atlantis, you're going to play a Louisville team who's got a lot of talent. A lot more talent than what UNC Greensboro had tonight.
And even more talent than I believe South Carolina has, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. And the style, you mentioned it, is completely different style than what Indiana's faced so far. If they come out with this lack of effort again, which I don't think they will, I think you can't overreact right now. It seems like Indiana wakes up for these bigger games. Tennessee, they went on the road and won their exhibition game. You got to remember that. They handled South Carolina last week, but I think their effort will be a lot better. But if it's not, Louisville's going to take advantage of that, and Louisville's going to beat this team just strictly because of effort. And that's what it comes down to, these Battle for Atlantis, the Maui Invitational, these type of tournaments. It's all who's motivated to win, who wants to come out there and compete, that wins these tournaments. And if Indiana's going to play like that, like they did tonight, they're not going to win this tournament. They might not even win a game when it comes to that. So it's a little nerve-wracking right now. They definitely got to watch the film. They definitely got to wake up a little bit, and this coaching staff's got to be hard on them after this performance.
I do want to say, I mean, if you do want to take anything positive away from these first 4 games, I mean, if you compare them to kind of how the beginning of the season went last year, there was definitely a lot more close calls during the teams like Morehead State, Army, those types of games. You haven't been in that situation where you're playing these much lesser level opponents and you find yourself, struggling in the final minutes of the game. Give credit to guys like Bryson Tucker and Luke Goody in the second half for making big shots. It's good to see Luke Goody finally hit a 3-pointer. I know I don't think it's his first official 3-pointer with the Hoosiers.
I think it's third.
It felt like it. There was a point where he shot tonight, and I'm just like, man, he cannot buy a bucket. And I don't know. Good on him, especially good on him to hit one, while things were, kind of trending in the right direction. He was able to kind of ride that momentum that Bryson Tucker was also helping create. And that was a nice little stretch during the second half, to see them pull away from that UNC Greensboro team that was really, they were staying in it at that point.
Yeah, let's talk about Bryson Tucker for a little bit because that kid can play. That kid has proven that he belongs. And you've seen 2 games in a row now. He was really big in the South Carolina game. He's big. He's big off the bench for these guys. And that mid-range jumper, that mid-range game for him, that Robbie Hummel called it a lost start, and it absolutely is because you don't see it a lot in today's game. It's automatic for him, and he takes advantage of it. The kid's just mature, for his age, and for him to come in these big moments where he kind of took, pride in, like, Indiana was playing very lackluster this game or whatever. He took pride in, like, hey, I got to wake this team up. I got to bring energy off the bench. And that's exactly what he did. And you want to mention Luke Goody. He did hit a good shot in that stretch where Indiana really needed to kind of spread things out a little bit. He hit a big shot there. So I'm hoping that is that confidence booster that you need for him for the rest of the season, because with shooters like that, it comes down to confidence a lot of the times. And if his confidence is low, if he keeps missing shots, that confidence is just going to get weaker and weaker. And you don't want to see that happen. You want to see him hit big shots like that. And hopefully he can continue to do that at a higher rate as well. Because, Indiana, even though they shot the ball outside of the perimeter well in the South Carolina game, they didn't really shoot it that well tonight. So hopefully this is just kind of like, a misstep in a kind of a way, but hopefully they can correct that. But, they got a lot of things to fix before the Battle for Atlantis, that's for sure.
Also, a few decent minutes from Langdon Hatton tonight. He only made one shot, but it was a really nice shot under the rim. I believe it was in transition, if I remember correctly, and he kind of just appeared out of nowhere. I didn't realize he was in the game until he made that shot, and I was like, okay, nice to see him come in and give Umar Ballo some relief minutes.
Well, unfortunately, yes, Langdon Hatton did play well, but unfortunately, that's when the rotations happens, the mass subbing, and it's not anything against Langdon Hatton or anything like that. I personally just don't want to see him on the floor in these types of games, just because I want to see more of a 3-man rotation of McKenzie and Baco, and I'll even throw in Luke Goody. I want to see a 4-man front court rotation of Luke Goody, McKenzie and Baco, Malik Renew, and Omar Bello. I really only want to use Langdon Hatton if it's a break glass in case of emergency type of role. Mike Woodson, I know what he's doing. He wants to see what he's got with this team. He wants to rest people. He wants to not play anybody. Same time, dude, you got to get away from this mass subbing. It just doesn't work. It didn't work last year. It just doesn't work. And I know he kept Miles Rice in. He kept Kanan Carlisle in at times. There was a really weird lineup where it was like Carlisle, Galloway, Tucker, Goody, and I think Hatton. Just weird. Like that has nothing that really values anything on the floor. He's just got to go away from that. The mass subbing just got to stop. These kids will be fine. They'll play plenty of minutes, and they won't get tired. So just got to be better with the rotations. I think that's going to fix a lot of these problems.
And maybe I'm wrong when I mentioned this, but I don't believe subbing was an issue against South Carolina.
It wasn't. It was great. It was perfect. I mean, what he was doing.
And maybe you're right. Maybe this was just Mike Woodson taking advantage of a lesser opponent and just seeing what he can do, like you were just mentioning.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly what he was doing. In these types of games, he wants to get as many players on the floor just to see what he's got, and he wants to tinker a lot with little things, which most coaches do that. They absolutely do that. But for Indiana's case, just can't happen because it kills momentum. And this team's built on momentum. If this team has a lot of momentum, they're pretty much unstoppable when they're getting out and running like that. You saw at times tonight. They're pretty unstoppable when they can do that. But when you take all those players out that are leading you in that charge, it just kills a lot of things. And, the poor bench guys got to come in and adjust, which, I mean, it's not completely on Mike Woodson. These bench guys got to be ready to step in, and they got to continue to build that momentum when they come into the game as well. So he can just be a little bit smarter when it comes to these rotations. I don't care who the opponent is. I think that's going to fix a lot of problems.
It'll be 6 days until this Indiana team takes the floor again. Again, they'll play back-to-back games, beginning with the Louisville Cardinals. Kyler, you're heading down to the Bahamas. When do you actually shove off?
I will be in the Bahamas. My flight leaves at 6:20 a.m. on Saturday. I will be in the Bahamas in Baha Mar. I think this is the resort I'm staying at Baha Mar, right as soon as kickoff happens for the Indiana football game.
Okay, so you'll be watching a little Indiana-Ohio State from paradise.
I will. I heard there's a sports book. I will be there to watch that there. So hopefully they got Fox. That's all I'm worried about.
Forgive me if I shouldn't ask this on the air, but will you be joining me for Indiana-Ohio State from paradise, or will it be somebody else?
Ooh, I forgot about that. It might be someone else. We'll talk off air, okay. But we'll see about that.
That would have been an interesting combination, though, especially if they were to get the win and you're just sitting back, I don't know, cracking a cold one, talking Indiana-Ohio State.
And that might be the case. Who knows? We might have to put a different age rating on this YouTube channel.
All right. We'll go ahead and wrap this thing up. Of course, In Touch with Indiana Sports tomorrow. We'll talk more about this game. And, of course, Indiana-Ohio State. Jeffrey the Greek's going to join us. Good interview with him. And then, we'll talk about the Hoosiers came out yesterday, or excuse me, this morning. So if you haven't watched that, check that out as well. And we'll have post-game wrap-ups this weekend for Indiana-Ohio State. And things really hit the ground running next week. So a lot more things coming up. And look forward to doing that. Kyler, any closing thoughts from you?
Nope. Check out all of our stuff. We're going to have a ton of previews. Obviously, football, biggest football game in Indiana program history on Saturday. So read all of our stuff. We got tons of great articles talking about the Hoosiers out. So, and then we'll also have another Battle for Atlantis preview for talking about the Hoosiers probably on Sunday or so.
Okay.
Check that out. And then, like John said, I'll be in the Bahamas. I'll be covering the event live there. So looking forward to it. Hopefully this Indiana team can kind of wake up a little bit and really surprise some people down there.
That's right. Boots on the ground. Kyler Staley's coming to town. You got to perform when Staley's in the building, right?
Absolutely.
All right. This has been another edition of the HoosierIllustrated.com Indiana basketball postgame wrap-up show. We'll talk to you next time.